The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Airfield like a blade through flesh. Major Rhiannon Ghost Kellaway had been nursing lukewarm coffee in the ready room when the transmission broke through, fragmented and desperate. Mayday! Dam 77. SEAL team compromised. Requesting immediate air support. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, a man she'd never met but whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. What made her blood freeze wasn't the panic in his voice. SEALs didn't panic. What terrified her was the silence that followed. Ghost set down her coffee with hands that had guided million-dollar aircraft through sandstorms and surface-to-air missiles, hands that now trembled slightly in the fluorescent glare of the briefing room. The Kajaki Dam operation had been classified above her clearance level, but fragments of intelligence briefings had filtered down through the ranks. Something about preventing a catastrophic flood that would wipe out 3 villages downstream. Something about a terrorist cell that had seized the dam's control systems. Something about a ticking clock that measured lives in minutes, not hours. Colonel Thaddeus Brennan burst through the ready room doors, his usually pristine uniform disheveled, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Ghost, we need you airborne in 15 minutes." His voice carried the weight of command and something else, something that sounded suspiciously like desperation. "The SEALs are pinned down at the dam. Intelligence says there are 40-plus insurgents with RPGs and heavy machine guns. The dam's structural integrity is compromised, and if those bastards blow the spillway, we're looking at a humanitarian catastrophe." Ghost felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded every mission, but this time it was different. This time, the stakes weren't just tactical, they were biblical. She'd flown 127 combat missions over 3 deployments, had earned her call sign by appearing seemingly from nowhere to deliver precision strikes that saved countless lives. But this felt like the mission that would define everything that came after. "What's the asset?" she asked, already knowing the answer from the look in Brennan's eyes. "A-10 Thunderbolt, fully loaded, 30mm cannon, Maverick missiles, and enough attitude to level a city block." He paused, studying her face in the harsh light. "Ghost, they're saying it's too late, that the dam's structural damage is too severe for close air support, that we're looking at acceptable losses." Ghost stood, her 5'4" frame suddenly seeming to fill the entire room. "Sir, with respect, acceptable losses aren't acceptable when there are still Americans breathing on that dam." The radio crackled again. Morrison's voice weaker now. "Ghost Actual, if you're listening, we're running out of time." Major Rhiannon Kellaway had always believed that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was flying straight through it. As she strode toward the flight line, her boots echoing against concrete still warm from yesterday's sun, she carried with her the weight of every mission that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in rural Montana, she'd learned to fly crop dusters before she could legally drive, her father's calloused hands guiding hers on the stick as they skimmed wheat fields that stretched toward horizons painted in gold and crimson. The Air Force had been her escape from a life that felt too small, too predictable, too safe. But it wasn't safety she'd found in the cockpit of an A-10 Warthog. It was purpose. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't built for elegance or speed. It was built to survive, to deliver devastating firepower at low altitude, and to bring its pilot home. The aircraft's twin turbofan engines mounted high on the fuselage, its distinctive straight wings, and its massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon made it look more like a flying tank than a graceful bird of prey. Which was exactly the point. Ghost's crew chief, Technical Sergeant Maria Vasquez, was already performing pre-flight checks when she arrived at the hardstand. Vasquez had been maintaining A-10s for 12 years, and she treated each aircraft like her own child. "She's ready, Major," Vasquez called out, her voice carrying over the whine of auxiliary power units spinning up across the flight line. "Full load of 30 Mike, 4 Mavericks, and enough fuel to stay on station for 2 hours." I've also loaded 2 Mark 82 500-pounders, just in case you need to rearrange some geography. Ghost ran her hands along the aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that had saved countless A-10 pilots from ground fire. The metal was still cool from the night air, but she knew that in 30 minutes, it would be scorching under the Afghan sun. She'd named this particular aircraft, Banshee's Wail, after the sound its cannon made when delivering death from above. The nose art depicted an ethereal female figure with flowing hair and eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you stood. Weather? Ghost asked, already knowing it would be perfect flying conditions. In Afghanistan, the weather was always perfect for killing. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, winds calm, Vasquez replied. It's going to be a beautiful day to save some SEALs. Ghost nodded, accepting her helmet from the crew chief. As she climbed into the cockpit, muscle memory taking over, she thought about the men waiting for her at the dam. She'd never met Lieutenant Commander Morrison, but she knew his type, the kind of operator who'd rather die than leave a man behind. The kind who'd hold an impossible position because his training and his conscience demanded nothing less. The radio crackled as she ran through her pre-flight checks. Ghost, this is Overlord. Mission parameters are fluid. The dam is structurally compromised. Repeat, structurally compromised. Any ordnance delivery risks catastrophic failure of the spillway. Ghost keyed her mic. Overlord, Ghost copies. What's the acceptable risk threshold? There isn't one, Ghost. You're going to have to thread the needle on this one. She fired up the twin General Electric TF-34 engines, feeling Banshee's Wail shudder to life beneath her. The sound was music, a deep, throaty roar that spoke of controlled violence and American engineering at its finest. As she taxied toward the runway, Ghost caught sight of her reflection in the cockpit glass. At 32, she looked younger than her years, but her eyes held the weight of every close air support mission she'd flown, every danger-close strike that had saved lives measured in meters rather than kilometers. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Ghost pushed the throttles forward. Banshee's Wail accelerated down the runway with the inexorable momentum of destiny itself. As the main landing gear lifted off the tarmac, Ghost felt the familiar surge of freedom that came with flight. Up here, above the dust and politics and bureaucracy, there was only physics and skill and the ancient dance between pilot and machine. But today's flight was different. Today, she wasn't just another pilot responding to another troops-in-contact situation. Today, she was flying into a legend that would follow her for the rest of her career. The radio chattered with updates from the Joint Operations Center, fragments of intelligence that painted a picture of chaos at the dam. Morrison's SEAL team had been inserted 12 hours earlier to conduct a reconnaissance mission that had gone sideways when they discovered the insurgents were further along in their demolition preparations than anyone had anticipated. Ghost, this is Reaper 2-1, came a voice she recognized as Captain Billy Hendricks, an Apache pilot she'd worked with on previous missions. We've got eyes on the dam. It's a shit show down there. The SEALs are holed up in the control room, but they're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. I count at least 30 muzzle flashes, maybe more. Ghost checked her navigation display. 15 minutes to the target area. 15 minutes to figure out how to save a dozen SEALs without bringing down a dam that protected 30,000 civilians downstream. Reaper 2-1, what's your assessment of the structural situation? Honestly, Ghost, it looks like the insurgents have been working on this for weeks. There are shaped charges positioned along the spillway, and I can see what looks like demolition cord running between them. The whole thing's rigged to blow. As Banshee's Wail climbed through 10,000 feet, Ghost began to understand the magnitude of what she was facing. This wasn't just a close air support mission. It was a surgical strike that required the precision of a neurosurgeon and the firepower of an artillery battery. One mistake, one poorly placed round, and she'd be responsible for a disaster that would make international headlines for all the wrong reasons. The Kajaki Dam stretched across the Helmand River like a concrete bridge between life and death. Built by American engineers in the 1950s as part of a peaceful development program, it had become a strategic chokepoint in America's longest war. The structure rose nearly 300 feet above the riverbed, its spillway capable of releasing millions of gallons of water in minutes. In the hands of terrorists, it was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at the heart of 3 villages that had dared to cooperate with coalition forces. Ghost descended through 8,000 feet, her eyes scanning the horizon for the distinctive shape of the dam. When it came into view, she felt her breath catch. Even from 20 miles away, she could see the chaos unfolding. Muzzle flashes sparked like deadly fireworks from positions scattered across the dam's superstructure. Smoke rose from at least 3 separate fires, and the concrete spillway showed dark scars where explosives had already been detonated in test charges. "Ghost, this is Morrison." The SEAL commander's voice was steady despite the automatic weapons fire crackling in the background. "We're in the control room, but we won't last much longer. They've got us surrounded and they're bringing up heavier weapons. I need you to know, they've rigged this whole place to blow. We found the master detonator in the main console. Best I can tell, they're planning to breach the spillway in coordinated sequence." Ghost felt ice water flow through her veins. A coordinated demolition meant this wasn't the work of local insurgents with improvised explosives. This was professional, military-grade sabotage, designed to cause maximum civilian casualties while eliminating American Special Operations Forces. "Morrison, how much time do we have?" "Hard to say. They could trigger it any second, or they might be waiting for more of us to show up. Either way, we need air support now." Ghost armed her weapons systems, watching as the targeting computer came online. The A-10's heads-up display painted the world in electronic symbology, turning the deadly landscape below into a video game where the stakes were measured in human lives. "Morrison, I need you to mark your position with infrared strobes. I'm coming in from the south." "Ghost, be advised, there are shaped charges along the southern approach. If you hit them with cannon fire, you might trigger a sympathetic detonation." She was threading a needle blindfolded while riding a bucking bronco. Ghost had trained for impossible missions her entire career, but this was beyond impossible. This was physics and luck and split-second timing wrapped in a package that could either save lives or end her career in a fireball visible from space. "Reaper 2-1, I need you to mark targets with your laser designator. Anything that's shooting at our guys gets lit up." "Copy, Ghost, painting targets now." The Apache's laser designator began splashing invisible infrared energy onto enemy positions, creating target reference points that showed up on Ghost's weapons display like deadly Christmas ornaments. She counted 14 separate firing positions, each one carefully positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that would make approach from any direction a suicide mission for ground forces. But Ghost wasn't ground forces. She was a pilot with 3,000 hours of flight time and an aircraft designed to survive the kind of punishment that would vaporize anything else in the inventory. As she rolled into her attack run, dropping through 4,000 feet at nearly 300 knots, she felt the familiar calm that came with extreme focus. Everything else, the politics, the career implications, the impossible nature of the mission, faded away until there was only the target, the aircraft, and her finger on the trigger. The first burst from the GAU-8 cannon sounded like the world's largest chainsaw cutting through steel. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streaked downward at nearly 4,000 feet per second, each one carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through armored vehicles. Ghost watched through her targeting pod as the rounds impacted a machine gun position on the dam's eastern rampart, turning concrete into dust and silencing the weapon forever. "Good hits, Ghost." Morrison's voice carried a note of hope for the first time. "That's one down, but they're repositioning. I've got movement on the spillway itself." Ghost pulled up from her attack run, feeling the G-forces try to push her through the seat as Banshee's wail climbed back to altitude. The aircraft shuddered slightly as small arms fire impacted the armored belly, but the titanium bathtub did its job, protecting both pilot and vital systems from the angry hornets buzzing up from below. Morrison, I need a damage assessment on that spillway. How close are they to triggering the demolition? Working on it, Ghost. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds felt like 30 years as Ghost set up for her next attack run. She could see insurgents moving across the dam's surface like ants on a picnic table, some of them dragging what looked like additional explosives toward the spillway controls. Time was running out, and each minute of delay brought them closer to a catastrophe that would dwarf anything the war had produced so far. Ghost, this is Morrison. I've got eyes on the detonation sequence. They're using a cascading system. If they trigger the primary charges, it'll set off secondary explosions all along the spillway. But here's the thing. The primary charges are located right next to our position. If you can take them out with precision fire, you might be able to disrupt the whole sequence. Ghost felt her mouth go dry. Morrison was asking her to deliver cannon fire within meters of his position, close enough that the concussion alone could kill him and his men. It was the kind of danger-close support that existed in theory, but was rarely attempted in practice. Morrison, confirm you're requesting fire mission within 50 meters of friendly forces. Affirmative, Ghost, we're out of options. She banked Banshee's wail into a steep diving turn, lining up on the primary demolition site. Through her targeting pod, she could see the shaped charges Morrison had described, industrial-grade explosives designed to cut through concrete like butter. They were positioned with military precision, each one calculated to cause maximum structural damage when detonated in sequence. But they were also positioned within 20 meters of the control room, where Morrison and his men were making their last stand. Ghost had earned her call sign during her first deployment, when she'd appeared seemingly from nowhere to deliver a perfect gun run that had saved an entire Marine platoon from being overrun. The Marines had said she'd come out of the sky like a ghost, silent and deadly, and gone before the enemy knew what hit them. But this was different. This wasn't about appearing from nowhere. This was about being exactly where she needed to be, exactly when she needed to be there, with exactly the right amount of firepower to save lives without taking them. Ghost, inbound hot. Her voice was steady as granite as she rolled into the attack run that would define her career. The aircraft screamed downward through 3,000 feet, the twin engines howling like banshees as she lined up on target. Through the heads-up display, she could see the infrared strobes marking Morrison's position, a constellation of friendly markers surrounded by a galaxy of hostile muzzle flashes. The cannon roared again, but this time Ghost fired in short, controlled bursts, walking the rounds across the demolition site with surgical precision. Each burst lasted less than a second, but in that second, nearly 100 rounds of depleted uranium hammered into the concrete around the primary charges. The explosions that followed weren't the thunderous detonations of a successful demolition. They were the sharp, contained blasts of shaped charges being destroyed before they could fulfill their intended purpose. Ghost, that's a direct hit. Morrison's voice carried across the radio waves with the force of a prayer answered. Primary demo is neutralized. Repeat, primary demo is neutralized. But we've still got secondary charges scattered across the spillway, and they're bringing up more insurgents from the south. Ghost pulled up from her attack run, feeling the aircraft shudder as more small arms fire found its mark. Warning lights began flickering on her instrument panel, nothing critical yet, but reminders that even the legendary toughness of the A-10 had its limits. She keyed her mic to respond to Morrison when another voice cut across the radio frequency. Ghost, this is Overlord. Be advised, we're tracking a technical vehicle approaching your position from the northwest. Intelligence suggests it may be carrying additional demolition equipment. Through her targeting pod, Ghost spotted the vehicle Morrison had mentioned, a Toyota pickup truck modified with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. But more concerning was the cargo visible under a canvas tarp. Cylindrical objects that could only be additional explosives, enough to finish what the primary charges had started. Morrison, I've got eyes on a technical approaching from your northwest. They're bringing more demo to the party. Copy Ghost. We see them, but we can't do anything about it from here. You're going to have to take them out before they reach the spillway. The technical was moving fast across the desert floor, kicking up a plume of dust that marked its progress like a comet's tail. Ghost calculated intercept courses and weapons solutions with the cold precision that had made her one of the most effective close air support pilots in theater. The Maverick missiles hanging under Banshee's whale's wings were designed for exactly this kind of target: armored vehicles and high-value installations that required more firepower than the cannon could deliver. But using a Maverick meant accepting the risk of collateral damage. The missile carried a 125-pound warhead that would obliterate the technical and everything within a 100-meter radius. If there were civilians in the area, shepherds, farmers, anyone who'd chosen the wrong day to be in the wrong place, they'd become statistics in a war that already had too many. Overlord, this is Ghost, requesting clearance for Maverick employment against technical target. I need confirmation that the area is clear of civilians. Ghost, Overlord, you are cleared hot. Intelligence confirms no civilian traffic in your engagement area. Ghost selected the AGM-65 Maverick missile and locked onto the technical's heat signature. The missile's infrared seeker painted the target with electronic precision, turning the speeding vehicle into a geometric shape on her display screen. She squeezed the trigger, feeling Banshee's whale jolt slightly as the missile separated from its pylon and accelerated toward the target at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The explosion, when it came, was visible from 20 miles away. The technical vanished in a ball of orange flame and black smoke, taking with it enough explosives to level a city block. Ghost watched the smoke rise into the morning sky and felt no satisfaction, only the grim professionalism that came with necessary violence. Good hit, Ghost, Morrison reported. That's one less problem to worry about. But we've still got hostiles in fighting positions all along the dam superstructure, and I'm seeing movement that suggests they're trying to manually detonate some of the remaining charges. Ghost checked her fuel status and weapons inventory. She had enough gas for another 40 minutes on station, 2 more Mavericks, 1 Mark 82 bomb, and approximately 800 rounds of 30 ammunition. It sounded like a lot until you considered that she was facing an enemy force that had been planning this operation for weeks, possibly months, and had prepared accordingly. Morrison, I need you to prioritize targets for me. What's the most immediate threat to the dam's structural integrity? Stand by, Ghost. The radio went quiet for nearly 30 seconds, filled only with the distant sound of automatic weapons fire and the occasional explosion. When Morrison's voice returned, it carried the weight of a man who'd seen too much war. Ghost, I've got visual confirmation that they're attempting to manually detonate secondary charges along the spillway's eastern edge. If those go off, they might create enough structural damage to trigger a cascade failure even without the primary demo. Ghost rolled Banshee's whale into another attack run, this time approaching from the east to avoid the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft fire. The dam grew larger in her windscreen, its concrete bulk scarred by explosions and small arms fire. She could see individual figures moving across the spillway, some of them insurgents, others possibly civilians caught in the crossfire. At 300 knots and dropping fast, she had seconds to distinguish between friend and foe, between legitimate targets and innocents, whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the worst possible time. The cannon spoke again, its voice the sound of controlled thunder. This time Ghost targeted individual fighting positions with single, precise bursts, each one calculated to neutralize threats without causing unnecessary collateral damage. She watched through her targeting pod as rounds impacted concrete and steel, silencing machine guns and forcing insurgents to abandon their positions. But for every target she eliminated, two more seemed to appear. The enemy had prepared for this fight, and they were willing to die to complete their mission. As Ghost pulled up from her attack run, she realized that conventional tactics weren't going to be enough. She needed to think like the enemy, to anticipate their next move before they made it. Morrison, based on what you're seeing, where do you think they'll make their next move? That's a good question, Ghost. If I were them, I'd try to draw you into a kill zone where they could bring multiple weapons to bear simultaneously. My guess is they're going to try to bait you into making a low-level attack run over the spillway itself, where they can hit you with everything they've got. Ghost considered this as she climbed back to altitude. Morrison was right. The enemy's best chance of stopping her was to force her into a predictable attack pattern where they could concentrate their fire, which meant she needed to do exactly the opposite of what they expected. Morrison, I'm going to try something unconventional. I need you and your men to be ready to move on my signal. Copy, Ghost. What do you have in mind? Instead of answering directly, Ghost selected her remaining Mark 82 bomb and programmed it for airburst detonation. The 500-pound general-purpose bomb wasn't designed for precision strikes. It was designed to create maximum blast effect over a wide area. But if she could detonate it at exactly the right altitude and location, she might be able to create enough confusion and chaos to give Morrison's team the opportunity they needed to escape. Morrison, in 30 seconds I'm going to drop a 500-pound bomb configured for airburst over the northern approach to the dam. The blast should suppress enemy fire long enough for you to make your move. Can you get your team to the extraction point? Ghost, that's cutting it pretty close. The blast radius on a Mark 82 is. I know what the blast radius is, Morrison, trust me. Ghost rolled into her final attack run, descending through 2,000 feet as she lined up on the northern approach to the dam. Every instinct told her this was insane, that she was risking everything on a maneuver that existed in the gray area between tactics and desperation. But conventional wisdom hadn't gotten Morrison and his men into this situation, and it wasn't going to get them out. She released the bomb at 1,500 feet, pulling up immediately into a crushing G-climb that pushed her deep into her seat. Below, the Mark 82 fell through the morning air like a metal meteor, its fuse counting down the seconds until detonation. Ghost watched through her mirrors as the bomb exploded in a flower of flame and pressure, the blast wave rippling outward across the dam's superstructure like a stone thrown into still water. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every insurgent position within 300 meters of the blast was either destroyed or abandoned, their occupants either dead or too stunned to continue fighting. In the sudden silence that followed, Ghost could hear Morrison's voice cutting through the radio static with military precision. Ghost, that's our cue. Team is moving to extraction point now. We've got the demo equipment and intelligence packages. Mission complete. But even as Morrison spoke, Ghost could see new movement on the dam's eastern approach. More vehicles, more insurgents, more weapons being brought to bear against the SEAL team that was now exposed and vulnerable as they moved across open ground toward their extraction point. The fight wasn't over. It was just entering its most dangerous phase. Morrison, you've got company coming from the east. At least 2 more technicals and what looks like a whole squad of reinforcements. Ghost had less than 10 minutes of fuel remaining, enough for one more attack run before she'd be forced to return to base. One more chance to ensure that Morrison and his men made it home alive. She selected her final Maverick missile and began her approach, knowing that everything depended on the next few minutes. As Banshee's wail screamed down from the sky one last time, Ghost thought about the radio call that had started this mission, about the desperate voice of a SEAL commander who needed help when help seemed impossible. She thought about the dam below, scarred but still standing, its concrete walls holding back millions of gallons of water that would otherwise devastate 3 villages downstream. But mostly, she thought about the men running across that dam, American warriors who'd volunteered for a mission that everyone knew was too dangerous, too complex, too impossible to succeed. Men who deserved to go home to their families, their children, their own small corners of peace in a world that seemed determined to tear itself apart. The Maverick missile streaked downward like a bolt of lightning, its infrared seeker locked onto the lead technical's heat signature. The explosion lit up the eastern approach to the dam, eliminating the immediate threat to Morrison's team and buying them precious seconds to reach the extraction point. Ghost, this is Morrison. We're at the LZ. Extraction birds are inbound. I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. Ghost keyed her mic one final time as she turned Banshee's whale toward home, the aircraft's fuel gauges showing numbers that would have terrified her under any other circumstances. Morrison, just get your men home safe. That's thanks enough. As the Kajaki Dam fell away behind her, growing smaller in her mirrors, until it was just another feature in Afghanistan's endless landscape of brown and beige, Ghost felt the weight of what had happened beginning to settle on her shoulders. She'd flown the mission that everyone said was impossible, had threaded the needle between success and catastrophe with margins measured in meters and seconds. But more than that, she'd proven something that the skeptics in the Pentagon and the doubters in her own squadron had never believed: that precision and power weren't mutually exclusive, that the right pilot in the right aircraft at the right moment could accomplish things that existed beyond the realm of conventional wisdom. The radio crackled with congratulations from Overlord, updates on Morrison's successful extraction, and requests for detailed after-action reports that would follow her for the rest of her career. But Ghost heard none of it. She was listening to something else entirely: the sound of Banshee's whale's engines, steady and strong, carrying her home across a sky that suddenly seemed infinite with possibility. When she landed at Bagram 40 minutes later, running on fumes and adrenaline, Ghost found a crowd waiting for her on the flight line. Word of the mission had spread through the base with the speed of wildfire, carried by radio chatter and intelligence updates that painted a picture of precision aviation at its absolute finest. Colonel Brennan was there, along with Morrison's commanding officer, representatives from Joint Special Operations Command, and what seemed like half the base's aviation assets. But Ghost barely saw them. She was focused on Technical Sergeant Vasquez, her crew chief, who was waiting beside Banshee's whale with a maintenance clipboard and the kind of smile that said more than words ever could. Vasquez had counted the holes in the aircraft's skin, had assessed the battle damage that spoke of a mission flown too low and too dangerous for anyone's comfort. "How's she look, Sergeant?" Ghost asked as she climbed down from the cockpit. "She'll fly again, Major. A few patches, some electrical work, maybe a new radio antenna. Nothing that'll keep her on the ground for more than a day or two." Ghost nodded, running her hand along Banshee's whale's scarred but unbroken skin. The aircraft had brought her home safe, just as it had brought her home from 127 previous combat missions. But this time felt different. This time felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. "Major Kellaway," Colonel Brennan's voice cut through her reverie. "Outstanding work today. Absolutely outstanding. The SEALs are calling it the best close air support mission they've ever seen, and that's saying something." Ghost turned to face her commanding officer, suddenly aware that she was still wearing her flight suit, still covered in the sweat and adrenaline residue of a mission that had tested every skill she'd developed over 3,000 hours of flight time. "Thank you, sir. Just glad we could bring everyone home." "Major, I think you're being modest. What you did today, threading precision fires between friendly forces and critical infrastructure while under direct fire, that's the kind of flying that legends are made of." As Brennan spoke, Ghost became aware that the crowd around them had grown. Pilots, Maintainers, intelligence officers, and support personnel had gathered on the flight line, drawn by rumors of a mission that sounded too incredible to be true. She saw faces she recognized, people she'd served with, flown with, shared the kind of professional relationships that were built on mutual respect and shared danger. But she also saw something else in their expressions. A new kind of respect, the kind reserved for pilots who'd done something extraordinary under impossible circumstances. Word of her precision strikes at the Kajaki Dam was already spreading through the aviation community, carried by radio chatter and intelligence reports that painted a picture of aerial warfare at its most demanding. "Sir, I was just doing my job," Ghost replied. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Today had been different. Today had been about more than just following orders or completing a mission. Today had been about proving that excellence under pressure was possible, that the right combination of skill, aircraft, and determination could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Lieutenant Commander Morrison appeared at the edge of the crowd, still wearing his combat gear, but with his weapon slung and his face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from 12 hours of continuous combat operations. He approached Ghost with the measured stride of a professional warrior who'd seen more than his share of violence. "Major Kellaway," Morrison said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did today saved not just my team, but potentially thousands of civilians downstream from that dam. I've been in special operations for 15 years, and I've never seen flying like that." Ghost shook Morrison's hand, feeling the calluses and scars that spoke of a career spent in harm's way. "Commander, your team did the hard part. I just provided fire support." Morrison smiled, the kind of expression that suggested he wasn't buying false modesty. "Major, with respect, what you did today was surgical. Precision fires within 20 meters of friendly forces, neutralizing demolition charges without triggering a cascade failure, eliminating vehicle threats while preserving infrastructure. That's not just fire support. That's artistry." As Morrison spoke, Ghost found herself thinking about the mission from his perspective. From the ground, watching an A-10 make repeated attack runs while insurgents fired everything they had at the aircraft, it must have looked like controlled chaos. But from her perspective, it had felt like the culmination of every training mission, every simulator session, every hour of flight time she'd accumulated over her career. "Commander, can I ask you something?" Ghost said. "When you called for air support this morning, did you think it was possible to save the dam and get your team out safely?" Morrison considered the question for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the kind of honesty that came from facing mortality and walking away intact. "Honestly, Major, I thought we were looking at a choice between bad and worse. Best case scenario, we'd evacuate and let them blow the dam. Worst case, we'd all die trying to prevent a catastrophe that was bigger than any of us." "What changed your mind?" "You did, Major. The first time I heard your voice on the radio, there was something different about it. Most pilots, when they hear about a mission like this, you can hear the doubt in their voice. The concern about whether the risk is worth it, whether the mission is even possible. But not you. You sounded like you were already planning your attack runs before I finished explaining the situation." Ghost thought about Morrison's words as the crowd around them gradually dispersed, personnel returning to their duties and responsibilities with the satisfied air of people who'd witnessed something remarkable. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the flight line, and she could smell the familiar mixture of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and desert dust that defined life on an air base in Afghanistan. "Commander, I have to ask, how many times have you worked with A-10s before today?" Morrison's expression changed, showing what might have been surprise or amusement. "Today was my first time, Major. My team usually works with Apache helicopters or F-16s for close air support. But when we called for help this morning, you were the only asset available in theater." Ghost felt something cold settle in her stomach. Morrison and his men had entrusted their lives to an aircraft and pilot they'd never worked with before, in a situation where precision and timing meant the difference between success and catastrophe. The weight of that responsibility suddenly felt heavier than the G-forces she'd pulled during her attack runs. "Well, Commander, I hope we lived up to your expectations." "Major, you exceeded them, by a significant margin." As Morrison walked away, heading toward the debriefing rooms where he'd spend the next several hours explaining the mission to intelligence officers and operational commanders, Ghost found herself alone on the flight line with Banshee's Whale and Technical Sergeant Vasquez. The aircraft sat quietly in the afternoon sun, its battle damage visible but not critical, its weapons pylons empty, but its mission complete. "Sergeant, what's the word from maintenance control? When can we get her back in the air?" Vasquez consulted her clipboard, running down a checklist that covered everything from hydraul,